Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring today's most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. In a month's time, America will see Donald Trump return to the Oval Office. In the midst of growing political turmoil in South Korea, with President Yoon Suk Yeol's impeachment crisis and controversial martial law declaration, global attention is turning to how this may influence U.S. foreign policy under President-elect Donald Trump. From his first press conference, where Trump outlined plans to engage with China, Japan, North Korea, and Russia without mentioning South Korea, to the broader implications for trade, security, and diplomatic relations, key questions are emerging. So how will Trump's strategies impact South Korea and its position on the global stage? And how will Trump's unique foreign policy choices, from a potential peace deal with the war in Ukraine to direct talks with North Korea, shape the future of Seoul-Washington relations? For more on this, we invite Min Jung-hoon, professor at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy, in the studio with us. Welcome, Professor.
My pleasure, Race.
And also joining us from Washington, D.C. is Voice of America correspondent Chris Casquejo. Welcome to see you again, Chris.
Good to see you again, too.
So, Chris, before getting into the details, let me ask, South Korea is experiencing political turmoil, of course, amid President Yoon's impeachment crisis that followed his short-lived martial law declaration. How is the American public taking this?
Well, about 50 Korean Americans last week rallied at the White House, protesting against South Korean President Yoon over his botched martial law attempt. They also underscored their support for a resilient democracy in South Korea. And similar rallies were held in about a dozen other major U.S. cities last week. Meanwhile, VOA's Korean language service spoke with the first Korean American U.S. Senator Andy Kim. He said challenges always arise in a democracy, but they must be solved through a democratic and open process. Declaring martial law in the manner done undermined the fundamental foundation of governance of the people and dramatically raised South Korea's fragility at a time when the people deserve security and stability.
Right, so a lot of attention is still focusing on this crisis in Korea. Now, to Professor Min, U.S. President Donald Trump held his first press conference since he got elected, and there he outlined plans to meet with world leaders, including China, Japan, North Korea, and Russia, without mentioning South Korea. How should we read into this, and do you think the impeachment crisis had an impact on this?
Well, I don't think that the impeachment crisis had a significant impact on the overall relationship between South Korea and U.S. Instead, what Trump mentioned during his first press conference shows what agendas or issues President Trump is putting priority in foreign relations under his second presidency. As you mentioned, Trump talked about his relationships with the leaders in Russia, China, North Korea, and Japan. First, he mentioned the Russian President Vladimir Putin, who has been involved in the Russia and Ukraine war. It shows that Trump got the top priority to find a solution to end the war in his second presidency. And Trump also mentioned his relationships with President Xi Jinping in China, and he invited him to his inauguration ceremony. He shows that Trump wants to show off that he can manage China and China's leaders, and it also shows that the second Trump presidency will mainly focus on tracking the rise of China. In addition, Trump mentioned his relationships with Chairman Kim Jong-un of North Korea. As you know, during the presidential campaign this year, Trump repeatedly mentioned his good relationship with Chairman Kim. It shows the possibility that summit diplomacy would be revitalized under the second Trump government. Meanwhile, Trump also mentioned the possibility of meeting Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba before taking office, but it came out after he met the SoftBank CEO, Masayoshi's son, Son Jung-i in Korean, who announced the $100 billion investment in the United States over the next 4 years. It shows that Trump has got a pretty high price tag for having a meeting with him. So I expect that when Trump's got the list of the priority to talk about South Korea in terms of trade and other issues, then he will naturally talk about his relations with with South Korea.
Right, but as of now, it's a little bit back on the priority list.
Yes.
So you've mentioned also, Professor, Trump inviting Xi Jinping to his inauguration, which is a rare action because, of course, China is Washington's biggest rival. Then how would you assess future rivalry between Washington and Beijing?
Well, the Trump second government is expected to aggressively pursue the America First foreign policy in order to secure American interests on the international stage. So, except immediately coping with the ongoing two wars, Russian-Ukraine war and Israel-Hamas war, the second Trump government's strategic priority will be in its competition with China. So the Trump second government is likely to take aggressive policies against China upon taking office, and it will mainly pursue like a selective decoupling centered on advanced technologies and the second U.S.-China trade war. Meanwhile, regarding military and security matters, where U.S. still maintains a relative advantage over China, the two countries will refrain from direct military conflicts, and U.S. will prepare for its long-term competition by improving regional security cooperation, military innovation, and military technology developments. So it's not likely that U.S. will take on serious military conflicts with China around the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea. As you know, President Trump perceives war as an unnecessary act that entails tremendous costs, and he prefers to resolve issues through negotiations. And the last but not least, concerning Taiwan issues, the U.S. will manage the cross-strait relationship by maintaining its vague one-China policy while continuing to strategically take advantage of China through selling military weapons and other military and diplomatic assistance as a way of containing China. So we can see the kind of continuity from the Trump's first government in terms of the China policy, but we'll also see the more aggressive policy against China, mainly in terms of economic and trade policies.
Right. Now, Chris, we've mentioned about the America First policy. Trump tapped Howard Lutnick as his Commerce Secretary last month, who's expected to strengthen Trump's America First policies. Chris, remind us, who is this figure and what kind of comments have he been making on the administration's trade direction?
Well, Howard Lutnick is the person who is leading Trump's transition team, and he shares similar views with Trump on trade and tariffs. He advocates for imposing wide-ranging tariffs. He said in a CNBC interview in September, tariffs are an amazing tool for the president to use. We need to protect the American worker. Now, Lutnick would head a sprawling U.S. cabinet agency that is involved in funding new computer chip factories, imposing trade restrictions, releasing economic data, and monitoring the weather. It's also a position in which connections to CEOs and the wider business community are crucial. And Lutnick is also the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, which you might remember in the attacks on America in 9/11 in 2001. His brother actually died in that attack, and many of the company's employees. So he has a company that's really rebounded in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks on 9/11 here in the U.S.
Now, following this direction, there are growing calls for South Korea to prepare for such kind of measures under the second Trump administration. First, how would South Korea be directly affected by stronger trade policies, and how should we address those challenges, Professor?
Well, basically, taking into account the South Korea's strategic importance, the ROK-US alliance overall, the relations between the two countries will continue to be durable under the Trump second government. I think that Trump will agree on the need for maintaining its cooperation with South Korea in the areas of security, economy, technology, energy to check the rise of China and secure U.S. economic interests. But securing South Korea's interests in the face of President Trump's transaction-oriented alliance view in terms of the security matters and America First trade policy 2.0 in the economic and trade policies areas will be a major task in the ROK-U.S. relationships under the second Trump government. Specifically, U.S. will likely be aggressive in its trade relations with South Korea based on its America First trade policy 2.0. And each trade policy will consist of a protectionist approach in order to reduce the U.S. trade deficit. So trade barriers on South Korea's exports to the United States are likely to increase because South Korea is one of the countries with a trade surplus with the United States. So I think South Korea will need to be more realistic and pragmatic to cope with the second Trump government's aggressive movements of reducing its trade deficit. So, for example, South Korea can reduce its trade surplus by importing more natural gas and oil from the United States.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we move on to another topic, last one on the economy, following Trump's victory in the election, prices of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have been soaring and going down. It's been fluctuating. Chris, could you point out for us his plans for cryptocurrencies and what moves are being prepared by his incoming administration?
Well, President-elect Trump says he will make the United States the crypto capital of the world. If crypto is going to define the future, I want it to be mined, minted, and made in the USA, Trump said in July while on the campaign trail. Now, his nomination of pro-crypto Paul Atkins to run the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission led to Bitcoin hitting an all-time high of $103,619. And the cryptocurrency market has almost doubled over the year so far to hit a record just shy of $3.8 trillion, according to data provider CoinGecko. Now, another market analyst, Susanna Streeter, says the incoming administration is also looking at building up a strategic reserve of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, but digital currencies still face obstacles to wider acceptance. Pew Research Company or Center last month found that nearly 2/3 of Americans say that they have little to no confidence that current ways to invest in, trade, or use cryptocurrencies are reliable and safe. So the American public still largely does not get cryptocurrencies and is not investing in them. And that's a view echoed by Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. But the Trump administration, incoming Trump administration, has at least two people who are very bullish on cryptocurrency. The man who's tapped to lead the SEC, Paul Atkins, and Howard Lutnick, who we just talked about. He's also very bullish on Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
Right, so we'll have to see how it goes with the Fed opposing the plan. Now, let's go to the war in Ukraine. Trump mentioned that he would push both Zelensky and Putin to make a deal to end the war. Chris, what are the potential risks and benefits of the U.S. taking a more active role in mediating peace between the two countries?
President-elect Trump says he'll try for a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine at the start of his presidential term, but he said both sides may have to compromise. He also slammed outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden's decision to allow Ukraine to strike inside Russian territory with U.S.-provided weapons, hinting that when he takes office, he may reverse that move and put Ukraine in a very defensive position once again. Now, analyst William Pomerantz of the Wilson Center said that the future Trump decision to roll back such support would have significant military consequences for Ukraine and could pit Trump against its NATO allies. And Pomerantz said he sees a potential clash between our NATO allies and President Trump as to what the future is of the war. And quite frankly, he said, when Trump talks about negotiations, it really means that Ukraine has to negotiate and surrender, as it were, but he really doesn't put any conditions on Russia. So that's one analyst's view, that Trump might take a more favorable approach with Russia and not really do much to help Ukraine. But again, that's one analyst's view. So we'll have to see what happens.
Right. Now, about that, Trump has been stressing the idea of peace through strength. Professor Min, how would you assess the effectiveness of Trump's interference in bringing a halt to the war in Ukraine? And what are the limitations of that?
Well, personally, I think after taking office, President Trump will try to start off the negotiations to end the Russia-Ukraine war. And as Chris mentioned, I also think that the war will find a compromise that would be more favorable to Russia. As you know, during his presidential campaign this year, Trump mentioned that right after taking office, he would restore the America First foreign policy and bring peace and stability to Eastern Europe. And he also declared that he would negotiate to end the Russia-Ukraine war peacefully. And after winning the election, the President-elect Trump has nominated Keith Kellogg, a former national security advisor and retired general, as a special envoy to Ukraine and Russia. And he also contacted personally Putin and Zelensky to talk about the exit of the war. So I think the Trump will facilitate the negotiation between Russia and Ukraine to make a compromise to end the war. Of course, the negotiation process will be very tough, and it would not be easy to narrow down the gaps between the parties involved. That's mainly because the war has got various interests, including Russia, Ukraine, US, and NATO countries, and each of them has got its own different positions and interests. So we can say that although Trump argues that he will definitely finish the war as soon as possible, but it's not certain yet under what conditions and how quickly the negotiation will be complete. And it's not also clear how long the peace deal will guarantee the stability of the security in the European continent. So I think that the situation will be very volatile.
Right, so we have to see on what kind of conditions are being made. Now, a few days ago, Donald Trump appointed his foreign policy advisor, former German ambassador Richard Grenell, as special envoy for North Korean affairs. Chris, tell us, what kind of person is he, and what does his appointment signal regarding Trump's policies on North Korea going forward?
Richard Grenell previously served as acting director of national intelligence during Trump's first term from 2017 to 2021, and he was also a special presidential envoy for Serbia and Kosovo peace negotiations. Grenell, during Trump's first term, had a reputation for being a tough talker and being very blunt and sometimes contentious, which rankled the foreign policy establishment here in Washington, D.C., and also abroad. But his style is appreciated by the President-elect Trump, who believes that the blunt style is necessary when dealing with diplomats on the world stage. Now, Trump envisions Grenell as sort of a special envoy who will go into hot spots, currently the Middle East and Ukraine, Russia, to deal with these issues. The U.S. has had a dedicated special representative for North Korea since 2009, most recently filled by Jung Pak, and it's unclear whether Grenell's role or upcoming role would replace this one. It appears to reflect a deprioritization of North Korea compared to Trump's first term. Analysts say Trump's top foreign policy concerns immediately upon taking office will likely be the Russia-Ukraine war, the Middle East, and in Asia, U.S.-China relations will trump anything else in Asia.
Right, so the war in Ukraine would definitely be his top priority first. But Professor Min, Donald Trump, if he focuses on North Korea, he's expected to follow on reopening direct talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to address the escalating military threats. With the leadership vacuum here in South Korea currently ongoing, how should the South Korean government make sure that it doesn't stay out of discussions when Trump resumes talks with North Korea?
Yes, basically, I think that it's likely that the deadlock situation in North Korea-U.S. relations will be resolved through the summit diplomacy under the second Trump government. But it's not clear yet what North Korean policy direction the Trump second government will show. But it seems likely that the summit diplomacy will be revitalized. As you know, Trump emphasized his amicable relationships with Chairman Kim Jong-un during his re-election campaign this year. And after winning the election, it was reported that his team is preparing, considering the direct meetings between the two leaders, North Korea and the United States. So, and I think that North Korea will carefully consider Trump's love call because of its failure of the 2019 Hanoi summit and its relationships with Russia. But I think the North Korea will eventually accept the offer because improving its relations with the United States will be vital for its future. Meanwhile, some people are worried about the possibility that South Korea could be excluded from the resumption of the summit diplomacy between North Korea and the United States. And they argued that considering North Korea's hostile postures against South Korea nowadays and Trump's intention to fully take the credit, there is a possibility that they will reopen the direct talks between the two countries. So in order for South Korea to stay in the discussions, I think South Korea needs to provide its own plans, showing how to proceed the talks and negotiations about North Korea's nuclear powers. And South Korea also needed to strengthen its communication with the United States. So South Korea needed to persuade the ally, the United States, about why South Korea should remain in the discussions and what roles South Korea could do for the interests of the United States. So I think it's about time for South Korea to actively move to maintain its influence over important matters on the Korean Peninsula.
Right, so we should step up and be more proactive. We'll have to leave our discussion right here. Professor Min, thank you so much for your insights tonight.
Thank you.
And also, Chris from Washington, D.C., thank you so much.
Good to be with you.
Now, that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.